Anne-Marie Waters, leader of the political party For Britain, stood as a parliamentary candidate in the constituency of Lewisham last week, and a hustings event was held in order that the constituents could meet the candidates and listen to their views, but the event was closed down by the police in the face of violent, hard-left, neo-communist, anti-Anne-Marie Waters demonstrators outside the venue. And this derailment of our democratic process seems to have bypassed the British media, that purported bastion of free speech, in its entirety, along with all of our woeful clutch of traitor-class politicians, not one of whom has raised a question in Parliament about this violent crushing of Britain's democratic process. I cannot remember this ever happening in Britain before. I know it happened in the late 1920s and early 1930s in Germany, where Hitler's brown shirts routinely and violently closed down opposition meetings, but in Britain this violent anti-democratic thuggery is something very new. A point that really needs to be reinforced here is that this wasn't just a party meeting being shut down by far-left intimidation. This was about electing an MP to Parliament. The event was organised by local people in Lewisham with a belief in democracy who wished to hear the political views of all those vying to become their Member of Parliament. And they were understandably shocked and upset it could be shut down in such a violent and totalitarian manner, and are presumably even more shocked that the media don't consider this to be a matter of supreme importance in terms of Britain's democracy or lack thereof. The day after it happened, I learned from The Guardian that Theresa May is the daughter of Satan, and from the Daily Mail that a male epsilon semi-moron was very keen on having sex with a female epsilon semi-moron on an island devoted to love. But on Britain turning into Weimar Germany, I heard only a very obvious silence. So I gave up on the mainstream media and turned instead to the interweb, where I discovered the police lied to Anne-Marie and told her the hustings were cancelled and therefore not to bother turning up. They told this lie an hour before they did finally cancel the event, but not before candidates other than Anne-Marie, of course, had had their say. I also learned the far-left demonstrators came from an organisation called Stand Up to Racism, chaired by no less a person than Diane Abbott, the black shadow Home Secretary of the Labour Party, a woman who has publicly stated white people are divisive and evil. I discovered another member of Stand Up to Racism is Talha Ahmed, a high-ranking official in the Muslim Council of Britain, an organisation which has no time for our democracy and would like to see Britain ruled by Sharia law. I discovered the police were presented with two options: move the protesters on or cancel the hustings. In other words, uphold the law and defend our democratic process, or break the law and let violent neo-communists stamp on the principles of a democratic nation-state. The police chose to break the law, secure in the knowledge there would be no recrimination, which I think has a lot to do with the fact that the Labour Party's Sadiq Khan is the Muslim Mayor of London and thus holds great sway over the actions of the London Metropolitan Police. And it's not entirely impossible that Mayor Khan directly ordered the police to stop Anne-Marie from speaking. Now imagine an altogether different scenario. Imagine a Labour politician attending a hustings in a Conservative majority constituency. Imagine the Mayor of London was Conservative, Boris Johnson. Imagine hundreds of violent far-right protesters belonging to an organisation chaired by a Conservative Home Secretary with a history of anti-black racism. Imagine what would happen if the police dishonestly told the Labour candidate the event was cancelled in order to censor his or her voice. Imagine the violence continuing and they finally cancelled the event anyway. Imagine the 24/7 outrage pouring forth from the mainstream media. Imagine the barrage of questions. Earnest BBC reporters would shriek at Met Police Commissioner Cressida Dick just as they would shriek at Mayor Johnson. How could you allow these racist far-right thugs to stamp on the face of democracy, they would cry. Resign, they would thunder. Resign now. And they would have to resign, just as would the Conservative Home Secretary who organised the violence. Such a scenario would be the biggest news of 2018, and it would continue to reverberate for weeks on end, but instead we hear nothing, literally nothing. This is where we are now in Britain. What should be shockingly unimaginable has now become a concrete reality. If your political views don't conform with the politically correct establishment, you become a non-person. And any events you're involved in which are subjected to left-wing violence become non-events. It no longer matters that our centuries of democracy are traduced, despite the deaths of hundreds of thousands of our young men who sacrificed their lives in order to preserve our democracy. It no longer matters that we have become a third world country where political violence is condoned by the government, the police and the media. It no longer matters that we have become no different to Hitler's 1930s Berlin. Or at least it no longer matters if you are part of the traitor class establishment. But if it matters to you, if it enrages you, if it offends your sense of decency, morality and your belief in the democratic process, then you can do something. You can join Anne-Marie's party and you can help to halt this tidal wave of totalitarianism aimed at one group of people only, which is of course those of us who wish to preserve our country, our democracy and our very way of life. In the face of real, genuine tyranny, the British establishment is now behaving in a manner encapsulated so precisely by George Orwell in his novel 1984, quote, "If you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever." Orwell wrote that in 1948, and his dystopian future has now become our dystopian present, right down to the political ideology he told us would be responsible for stamping on our faces. Orwell called it INGSOC, which is simply an abbreviation of English socialism. And when the entire British establishment is now essentially Orwell's totalitarian big brother, engaged on stamping on the faces of all those it dislikes, then we must replace the establishment. And short of violent revolution, which by the way I am all for, seriously all for, we can only peacefully do it via the ballot box. Anne-Marie Waters' For Britain party can do that, but only with your support. So do please join it, support and support her, and do please subscribe to my channel, Paul Weston. Thank you.